Israel has never been safer inside its borders than today. And I applaud the Prime Minister for achieving that. I supported the Iran strikes at Fordo. I would rather have done it through the JCPOA, but I supported that. Obviously, Hezbollah, I supported that. The Houthis, I supported that. All fine. But as more secure they are inside the borders, they're probably weaker than they've ever been in the world. And as an American Jew, that really breaks my heart. Okay, guys? It really breaks my heart. And people would say, well, we've been there before. No, we've never been like this. I think there's a fundamental issue that we've got to address, and the war's got to end, and we're going to have a lot of work to do to repair it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition bonus episode of the J100 podcast. This past September, the Allgemeiner hosted a live event with Ambassador Tom Nides in front of a wonderful New York audience. Ambassador Tom Nides is a former U.S. ambassador to Israel, longtime public servant, and now at Blackstone. In this conversation, we spoke plainly about the hostages, Hamas, how this war ends responsibly, and what it means to keep the U.S.-Israel support bipartisan and strong. We also looked beyond headlines to leadership, empathy, and the hard choices that follow October 7th. We decided to publish this conversation today because we thought it was interesting to see how so many of the topics we discussed are not only still meaningful, but in fact, in some ways, more relevant now than ever before. For example, we spoke about what the day after might look like in Gaza and Israel, and why, what, and how Israel's global perception and reputation, especially among young people, is so critical moving forward. Also, we wanted to give those of you who didn't have the chance to attend this event in person an opportunity to listen to this powerful dialogue, and get a little glimpse into what some of the great audience events the Allgemeiner hosts throughout the year look like. A quick thank you to our hosts, Jeremy and Nicole Kroll, to the Core Club, and to all those who attended the event in person. And now, without further ado, this is my conversation with Ambassador Tom Nides. I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I know it's could be a challenging time for people, so I appreciate everybody making the effort, particularly Ambassador Nides for agreeing to be here for the high sum that we're paying him. So I appreciate his being here. I'll introduce myself. My name is David Cohen. Some of you know me, some of you don't yet know me. I am the relatively new CEO of the Allgemeiner. I just had my 1-year anniversary at the helm of this storied Jewish media outlet. We've been around 53 years. We cover the Jewish people. We chronicle our story. We cover events in Israel. We cover Jewish culture. And we can be found on our social media, online, on our website, our daily free email that goes out to thousands of subscribers. And we also recently launched the J100 podcast. J100 is a little bit of a take on the Time 100. It's the list that we publish every year of major contributors to Jewish life, both Jews and non-Jews, people who have impacted Jewish life as a whole and who are exemplary models in different realms of society. And we named this podcast the J100 podcast because we interview people who were selected for that list previously, potentially in the future, people of a certain caliber of leadership. And we've had a lot of amazing guests so far, and I encourage you to take a look at what's on that podcast, on that stream. And this is another rendition. Some of them we do via audio, some of them we do live. And this is in concert with our strategy of building community and building relationships with people. So we're glad that you were able to partake. I just want to introduce briefly Ambassador Nides, who really needs no introduction, but he has served in a few administrations. He worked for Secretary Clinton basically as her right hand. This goes back already a bit. He's worked in for-profit, currently at Blackstone, other major banks over the years, other major players in the world of finance, and of course, most recently renowned for being President Biden's U.S. ambassador to Israel. Quite a prominent role. I think maybe not, it was always a prominent role, but I think more recently, it's become a lot more elevated in its stature, and I took a real interest in Ambassador Nides during that period, and I studied his life and got to know him a little bit then, and I look forward to digging into this conversation here today. So, Ambassador, thank you so much for being here.
David, thank you for having me.
Okay, awesome. So I think we'd be remiss.
For the record, I didn't get any money.
It's important to document that, no, for sure. I also, by the way, want to thank Jeremy and Nicole Kroll. I don't know if they're here yet, but they are actually the hosts of this event. I think they belong to this club and they facilitated this. I think they'll be here shortly, so we're greatly appreciative of their efforts and their sponsorship as well. I think it'd be remiss not to begin. Ambassador Nides currently works at Blackstone. We're all keenly aware of tragic events that transpired at Blackstone very recently, very nearby. And particularly the tragic loss of Wesley Lopatner, who the ambassador mentioned to me he was in a meeting with just an hour or two before her quite untimely, unexpected demise, her murder. So we just want to ask you how people at Blackstone are doing, how people are responding and reacting to these really heinous crime.
Words just can't describe it, right? You don't think this stuff could happen to you, right? We're on Park Avenue, right? And it just, I think it is, it rocked the place. I mean, as you know, this lunatic came in and was really targeting the NFL, and the NFL has a few floors in our building, and I just, Wesley, she exemplified what's great about being a human being, being a Jew, being spiritual. And so I am, Ellie was one of her mentees. She had a lot of people who she looked out, especially young women who were coming up through the organization. And it makes me, it not only makes me sad, it outrages me, quite frankly, and that someone could come in and do something like that to us. And by the way, she wasn't the only one that was killed. There was 4 people killed that day. And so, as I remember, she feel a blessing to all of us, but it was really quite a traumatic time for our firm, and it still is. You never recover from this. You begin to learn with it, but you never recover from it, and I think it's quite tragic. But thank you for mentioning it.
Thank you for sharing that. Our offices, the Algamata offices, we don't disclose exactly where they are, but they are very close to Blackstone's offices. And I recall the very next day walking over just to observe and just to see that entire building shut down and nobody there. It's really unfathomable, as the ambassador mentioned. So let's jump in terms of just your background a little bit. I don't know if it's 7 children or 8 children. Let's assume it's 7 children. But I think you're the youngest of many children. You grew up the youngest of many children.
Yes.
I'm just curious how that informs your life and your experience.
Well, listen, I am the youngest of 8 kids. I grew up in Minnesota, in Duluth, Minnesota. We're very cold in Minnesota, which is reason why there's 8 kids. Okay, that was supposed to be funny.
I thought it was.
Yeah, I thought it was funny too. We were, I grew up in a very much a Reformed Jewish life. Being a Jew in Minnesota and being a Jew in Duluth in particular, there wasn't a lot of us. I think our synagogue, we had at one point 3 synagogues in a community of 100,000 people, and then ultimately the Orthodox shut down and the conservative temple merged with the Reform synagogue, and ultimately had one synagogue. And, I didn't really know. I mean, we were Jews. I mean, I was bar mitzvah, I was confirmed. I went to Herzl camp. It was a way of life, but there wasn't like a massive Jewish community. So all my friends were, as we like to refer to them, goyim. But those of my friends who were Jews were, the 10 of us were in confirmation class together. We're still friends today. We were really close knit family. So I think for me, people always ask me, I didn't grow up as a religious Jew, obviously. I grew up as a cultural Jew. I grew up as what it really means to be a Zionist kind of Jew, right? A guy who, grew up, my father was the president of the temple. My mother was the head of sisterhood. My father was the head of the UJA. We were like Jews, right? We were like, get involved, get in the middle of the game. Just don't sit and complain and talk about and whine about all the things that are going wrong. Get involved. And I was fortunate enough to be the beneficiary of being the youngest of. So all my brothers and sisters had already left the house when I had my parents to myself. So I had I had a great childhood, and certainly allowed me to become the person I became.
Certainly foreshadowed all of your great involvement in Jewish communal life.
Well, it's interesting you say it, because I really did. Again, in some way, I didn't obviously know it at the time, but this idea of tzedakah and giving back, and it's kind of how I think about my life. Again, I don't, plenty of people sitting here are way more religious than I am. But being religious is interesting, but it's also, for me, it is how I conduct my life every day. And, obviously I was fortunate enough to be asked to be the ambassador to Israel. Did I ever think that as a little Jewish kid from Duluth, Minnesota, that I would end up being the American ambassador to Israel? Not in a leaving chance. My first trip to Israel, when I was uh, uh, 15 years old, I went on a NAFI trip, the Northern Federation of Temple Youth. I literally, this is before we had given up the Sinai Desert to the Egyptians, that I slept in the Sinai Desert. I woke up in the morning, and this is how I did not take the cable car up to top to Mount Masada like I did when I was ambassador. We walked at 4 o'clock in the morning with my Coca-Cola t-shirt in Hebrew. And if you turned it upside down, it said some other things, but I can't repeat. But the reality of this is that's a kind of, that was my first experience, and it was a remarkable, beautiful experience. And that was my first trip. And that's why I continue to promote all the trips to Israel, because I think it really does enlighten people about how important that little place is.
So I'm going to ask you a question now that's going to fast forward a little bit, and then we'll go back. But it's really something that, frankly, I've been curious about uh, ever since I saw you step away from your ambassadorship. Now, I was aware, I think some people are aware, that you kind of, I think a priori had committed or not committed that you were going to stay maybe the entirety of President Biden's term. You had family back in the States. It wasn't the simplest move to be in Israel away from family. And you did the best you could with that. And at a certain point, I think that you decided, that there was enough. You needed, as many people do, in that situation. And if I'm not mistaken, it was really just a few months after you stepped away from your ambassadorship that October 7th transpired. And I've always wondered, really from afar, I'd imagine on some level you're grateful that you were maybe not in that seat post October 7th. On the other hand, I'd imagine maybe there was some feelings of longing of like, wow, like, nobody ever asked for this, tragedy of the century, but had I maybe stayed on, maybe I could have done so much. So I'm curious how you.
That's a really good question. First of all, and you're absolutely right. My wife did not come with me to Israel. My wife has her own career. She's, helps run CNN. She was nice. By the way, she was nice enough to let me go, because quite frankly, if she had said, "Hey, listen, Tom, to be clear, if you go, you can like."
My wife would have told me that.
Kiss my marriage goodbye, and I would never have done that. And so I give her an enormous amount of credit for letting me go. I remember because my first, I tell you this very funny story, and I'm going to get back to the more serious issue. When I was, so I got there, and my son came with me, because I said, I can't go by myself. I'm going to look like a complete loser. And so I get there, I get confirmed, by the way, unanimously by the U.S. Senate. Just want to point that out. By the way, the second time I got confirmed unanimously, just saying, but probably won't happen the third time, but nonetheless, but if there is an opportunity.
That was another question.
Yeah, okay,
there's going to be a third time. We'll get to that at the end. Yeah.
So we go to Israel, and I'm at the King David Hotel, and I'm being picked up to present my credentials to President Herzog. It's a very formal event, and so my son and I were waiting at the curb at the King David Hotel, and the big limousine comes and drives up. It's got an Israeli flag and an American flag. It's the only limousine all of Israel. There's no stretch limousines anywhere in Israel except this one that's owned by the foreign ministry. I get into the back seat, and we're driving. I look at my son, and we're like, okay, this is kind of cool. And we go to the president's house. I don't know how many of you have been there, but it's a kind of cool, iconic house. The gates open. There's a band. There's TV cameras. There's people, and there's this red carpet. Okay. So Max and I, it should have been my wife. I turned to my son. I said, "You should have been mom here." I can imagine mom being here. Anyways, so we're walking down the red carpet, and at the end of the red carpet, my wife's not even Jewish, by the way. Okay. She said the kids would grow up Jewish. And I know for those of you who are in this, you're saying, well, they can't really be Jewish, but that's a whole different issue. But anyways, we're walking down to the red carpet, and I hand, my credentials to President Herzog, and he looks at them, and his wonderful wife is sitting there as well. And we got to go into the big hall. Okay. So you go to this beautiful, beautiful hall, the president's house, and there's two podiums. Now there's probably a couple hundred people. There are a lot of TV cameras, not because of me, but because, it's the American ambassador being sworn in his inaugural speech. So I'm standing there in my podiums. I'm a little nervous, to be honest with you. My hands are a little sweaty. I got my speech. He's got his podium, and he stands up.
Like you are right now, I know.
Yeah, very. You can tell I'm very nervous.
Right.
Anyways, so the President Herzog says, "Mr. Ambassador, I have a special surprise for you." I'm like, what? I don't see that in the script. I have your Hebrew school teacher from Duluth, Minnesota in the audience. Okay. I'm like, shit, you got to be kidding me. And this woman is like waving like this. I'm like, I don't even know who she is. I hope she's not listening to this. I mean, I didn't really remember her, to be honest. It was a few years earlier. And and now I'm panicking that she's going to ask me to do the, Hebrew alphabet. I'm going to stand up and like, I'm still working on my Hebrew. Okay. So she said, oh, that was my big moment. Anyway, fast forward. So, 2 years in, my wife visited a lot. I came back a lot. But I didn't really, to be honest, I didn't really want to blow up my marriage. And I thought that, I'd just been through the judicial reform stuff with the prime minister. I'd done a lot of stuff as relates to the West Bank. I did a bunch of stuff that I thought was really important. I got the visa waiver program. If you're an Israeli right now, you do not need a visa to come to the United States. You can thank me for that. I mean, you obviously ultimately, but I'm telling you, I didn't get any credit for it because October 7th happened, but you do not need a visa anymore to come to America, because I thought that was our most important ally, right? Why are you making this country go through all the hoops to get a visa? Anyway, that's a lot of work, way more work than anticipated. Anyway, so I said, I think I'm gonna step away. And the White House wasn't thrilled by this, by the way, to be clear. And because I was close to the president, obviously, but I was very close to Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and stuff. But they understood. So anyways, I came back, and then you were right. Less than 2 months later, I'm literally sitting in the Emirates in Abu Dhabi with Miriam Adelson, who had invited me to they just, no one knew, but they had just bought the Mavericks, and the Timberwolves, the Minnesota where I'm from, the Timberwolves were playing the Mavericks in an exhibit game in Abu Dhabi. So we're sitting at dinner, and I got Yusuf Al-Attaba, who is currently the UAE ambassador. It's myself, all the basketball players from the Mavericks and the Timberwolves, and I stand up and give this beautiful toast about the importance of the Abraham Accords and what it meant, and the importance of this relationship and the importance of the Emirates and the relationship. And then 3 hours later, we start getting these text messages of what's going on in Israel. And it rocketed me in a way that I think most of us will remember forever where we were on October 7th and October 8th. And I feel like guilty that I wasn't there? Yeah, I did, to be honest with you. I felt like, because remember, there was no ambassador at that point. I mean, my deputy was the acting ambassador, Stephanie Howell, who was a great, great human being and a great deputy, and she's going to be the ambassador to Bahrain. But, I felt badly about that, and I offered to go support, but I think she had it under control. So yeah, I did have a sense of like, I don't think I obviously could have stopped it. Nothing could have stopped it. Maybe I could have been effective if I was there. Jack Alou was a spectacular ambassador. I mean, I felt badly for Jack because the poor guy became a wartime ambassador. And I think, with my personality, I don't think I would have been as good as Jack was as a wartime ambassador, because I'm not sure I could have controlled myself as much as you need to in these jobs, right? Because you're operating on adrenaline, and I think I hadn't been there a couple of years, and I was way more loose than Jack is. Jack's way more disciplined in some of how he communicates. So I think, but in some sense, did I have like remorse that I wasn't there? Yeah, sure. I was very upset. In fact, interesting enough, I had taken a job at a financial institution, and I ultimately, I had only been there for 2 months, and I resigned like a week after October 7th. I've only been there for a couple of months, because I said, you know what, I got to spend this next few months working on Israel. And so I went and I quit, and I worked with my friend Eric Goldstein at the UJA. I did raised some money. I ran around the country talking about how important this was, the focus on Israel and the support of Israel. So in a small way, I tried to contribute during that period of time. So
Fascinating. You mentioned Miriam Adelson. I just find it fascinating. Just a brief caveat that I kind of forgot until you mentioned it. Miriam, if I'm not mistaken, bought your
She
house.
took my house away from me.
Meaning
So
I remember
this is
right,
great.
you did have a home like when
No,
you
it's
came to
hilarious.
Israel. Right?
So David Friedman, who I really like. I mean, David, there's nothing politically I agree with David on. I mean, beyond he's a really nice guy. Okay. I mean, his ideology and my ideologies are different. Okay, fine. But he's a really nice guy. And I made an effort to reach out to him when I was in Israel. Cause sometimes, you have these jobs and you don't want to talk to the people who had a job before. I'm like, hell, why not? I mean, even my staff were like, what are you doing? I said, I like David and and I can learn from him. And he, he's certainly probably maybe even a better Jew than me. Anyway, so, but David lived in the most fantastic house. He lived in the ambassador's house. Remember, we bought the house. It was the biggest, most beautiful house in all of Israel. The Americans got from the Israeli government.
In Herzliya on the water, right?
On the water, on the Mediterranean. Okay. Like the yard. Okay. Not that I'm envious. The yard had the July 4th party where 3,000 people were on the lawn. Okay. Just fast forward. So I'm like, okay, they sold the house before I got sworn in, and they sold the house because, they moved the embassy officially from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And they said, well, the American ambassador can't have a residence in Tel Aviv if the embassy is in Jerusalem. So they sold the house to Miriam Adelson for $74 million. Okay. It was not an insignificant check, but shockingly, they had the cash. Okay. So fast forward, I'm now living at the Waldorf Hotel in a 2-bedroom apartment, which is a whole nother story. So I'm the American ambassador. I'm Mr. Big, and my security team is sleeping outside my door of the hotel. Okay. So fast forward, a couple months go by, and David calls me and says, hey, Miriam would like to invite you to her house for Shabbat. And I'm like, okay. And my staff's like, are you sure? I said, sure. Tom, she's this, really conservative Republican. I said, I know who Miriam Adelson is. Okay, guys, I got it. Okay. So I said, David, you're going to go. He said, David and David's wife and I go to Miriam's house, and I would go through the long, windy driveway. It's beautiful American flag flapping in the air. I'm like envious. Okay. And the door opens, and she is standing in the living room, which is about 500 yards from the front door. Okay. And she says at the top of her lungs, this could have been your house. Okay. It was so spectacular because that's exactly what I would have said. Okay. If the tables were turned. And I spent a lot of time with her after that. She and I went to the March of Living together. We co-chaired the March of Living with David. And she was great. I mean, again, her politics are not my politics. I went to visit her in Vegas a few months ago and went and had dinner with her at her house with her family. Her son-in-law is a really good guy. Her kids are really great. You don't have to be like, just because I happen to be a liberal Democrat, you can still be friends with, conservative Republicans. And she's certainly that. And David is, she cares deeply about Israel. But that house thing was quite funny.
So this is actually just a great segue. I will mention just the word Allgemeiner, our media outlet, means universal. It means global, and we certainly try to give equal weight to different sides of the political spectrum. The first event that we did like this a year ago was actually with Ambassador David Friedman in South Florida. He and I were engaged in a similar type of conversation. So I'm glad that we're rounding out the.
I'm as smart as David is.
Well, I'm not commenting on that, but I do want to make the following point, and that is that. Ambassador, you and I have a mutual friend. I'll mention his name. I think you'll know who he is, Uri Pilichowski. And there's a great story. I don't know if everybody here knows. Uri Pilichowski is a rabbi in Israel. He lives in the West Bank. And there's a story that I heard Ambassador Nides say over in an interview that when he came to Israel, putting aside the politics of, I think he made the decision not to visit the West Bank, and this rabbi who lived on the West Bank was offended by that, and he wrote...
Let me tell you the story.
Sorry,
let me tell you the story. Okay, it's better than that. Okay, so, you get to Israel, and, all these people are doing interviews with you, okay? And you spout off stuff like you do with anything, right? I'm fairly smart, but, you're in a very complicated place. And I was being interviewed by the Jerusalem Post or Haaretz or some, I don't know what it was. And they said to me, well, I said, I'm a big open guy. Yes, I'm a liberal, but I'm more happy to see conservatives. I'll see anyone, Arabs, Palestinians, Orthodox Jews. It doesn't matter to me. Okay. And they said, well, would you go visit, the settlements in the West Bank, not to the West Bank, to the settlements, the West Bank? I said, no, I can't do that. It's against our policy. I can't do this, but I'm not, but if any of the settlers want to come visit me, my office is open. I have no issue with that. Okay. So, this guy Yuri, who I had no idea who he was, okay, leaves a note at my hotel. Ambassador Nides. I open up the letter, and this is a handwritten letter, basically saying, you said in your this elaborate thing that you weren't here to offend anybody, and you wanted to meet with everybody, and blah 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 blah. I'm offended. You said you wouldn't visit the settlements, and I'm a settler, and I'm offended. And he went on for, I don't know, 2 more pages. Anyway, so I look at the letter. I'm like, who is this kook? Okay. I didn't know who it was, but he left his phone number. I said to myself, I'm going to call Yuri. They go, why? I said, because I don't know. He made the effort to write this letter. Well, call him. I didn't know. I had no idea who he was. Okay. I had no idea who he was. Okay. I called the guy. So I probably talked to Yuri at least 2 times a week from every week that I was in Israel. Okay. He was hilarious. He's smart, well-learned. He still tried to get me to come to a settlement house all the time. He, carries his gun around, and the whole thing was like, he joked with me all the time. Come on Shabbat, you won't leave. You'll start shooting pigeons or whatever I shoot. Come to my house. He was a great human being as a scholar. Obviously, he was an American, moved to Israel. And he taught me a lot about tolerance. I mean, I still didn't go visit his house in the settlements, but he and I became good friends. And I think it was a lesson to me, like it is for everyone. You have to be open-minded, in which I normally am anyway. But it was a very interesting conversation. And we had this debate on the settlements from the get-go. I continued to debate him on the settlement issue because I felt, that what was going on, expanding to the settlements, his whole idea of Judea-Samaria, my idea, which was we needed to have a 2-state solution. So we had this very a colorful debate through my 2.5+ years there. But he's a great guy. I talked to him a couple of days ago, actually.
So my question really is, I think you're an excellent model of somebody who has a quality that many people lack in the current milieu, which is that you've shared 2 stories already of the ability to kind of talk across the aisle. And even if you may vehemently disagree with what's being said, you feel comfortable enough to engage in that conversation. You're comfortable enough in your own skin. And I was talking to my team about this before we came here, that this is something that I think is severely lacking in today's political dialogue, communal dialogues. My question really is, how do you suggest people implement or do what it is that you seem to have been doing?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like you can disagree. You don't have to be disagreeable, right? So but listen, people care deeply about these issues. I mean, this is emotional issues for people. I mean, people's views of what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in the West Bank, what the more conservative, the Haredi community, military service. These are real issues. These are not like, and people get very, very emotional about these issues. And so I don't want to make like, oh, I'm this, monkey guy that I can just basically, everything is great. And no, these are emotional issues. I do think you can have relationships with people who don't agree with you. This is where I think you're getting to. I think what makes me mad and angry is that if you don't agree with me, I'm not going to, I know your publication is way more conservative than I am in many things. I knew what I was coming to talk to. I knew the group I was talking to. I wasn't an idiot. I mean, I read the stuff. I mean, I don't always agree with the stuff you tell me, but I'm like, this is great. I was on the cover of one of the Haredi magazines a couple weeks ago. I like it. I like,
That's what gave me the idea actually for this conversation.
Yeah, no, I like it. I enjoy the conversation. I like the back and forth. I think it's enjoyable. But we can disagree, and I have views of it, but it doesn't mean that you have to be a jerk about it, and try to basically, convince what the person against you is like not someone you'll ever spend time with, because then I won't be able to spend half the time with half the people I know.
Let's dig in a little bit to some of the issues of the day in terms of what's going on in Israel. So I think if I can describe things, I don't even know how to describe it. There's certainly an impasse in terms of we still have hostages in Gaza. We have the IDF encircling and apparently preparing to invade Gaza. I'm curious, kind of like, what would you? I don't know if you have a relationship with Ambassador Huckabee, like you did with Ambassador Friedman, but what would you be whispering into Ambassador? Maybe you are, or maybe you're not. But what would you if you were in contact with Ambassador Huckabee? And just what is your perspective on how to resolve this almost intractable situation? And in all fairness, nobody has the answer to this, so it's not like I'm expecting you to.
So let me step back here, okay? Make no mistake, and I've spoken at college campuses. I've done 100 speeches of this. Hamas started this. They're the ones who killed 1,400 Jews. They're the ones who basically did the single most horrific thing that's happened to Jewish people since the Holocaust, okay? They did it and they knew what they were doing, okay? Make no mistake. And they could have ended this 2 years ago, okay? They could have never done it. They could have ended it. They could have given our hostages back. They are 150% responsible for what happened in Gaza, full stop, okay? Second point is, Hamas doesn't care about the Palestinian people. Their view is very simple. I've told this to every college kid I've gone to. Their whole belief system is the more Palestinians that die is better for the cause, okay? Because otherwise, you wouldn't put these people, these kids, in harm's way, okay? They wouldn't put them in harm's way, and they would never have allowed this happen because they knew what Israel would do, the retaliation. The Hamas didn't think they're going to take down the state of Israel. Yes, they wanted to create a regional war. That didn't happen, but they knew they weren't going to, with this single shot, they're going to take down Israel. They knew that Israel's retaliation would be so aggressive that they could potentially turn the region against Israel. That's all facts, okay? Third, the war needs to end. Make no mistake. I talk to hostage families every day, okay? I just got a text from, well, my friends whose kid's body is still in Israel and just wants, he just wants his kid's body back, okay? I have multiple friends whose kids were killed in the concert. But make no mistake, this has got its end. And so you'll say, well, that's really interesting, Tom, but the prime minister has said it cannot end till the defeat and the complete elimination of Hamas in Gaza. And this, fundamentally, I disagree with. I said it on the front page of the New York Times yesterday and 2 weeks ago, and I say it all the time. In my humble view, I have an enormous respect for the prime minister, for what he has done in his career. This I fundamentally disagree with. He fundamentally has defined success, in my personal view, is unachievable, how he's defined success, okay? If he had defined success, in my humble view, as simply October 7th is never, ever going to happen again. I made sure of that. It's never going to happen again. By the way, it should never happen in the first place. This wasn't like this unbelievable military act of, this wasn't our beeper gate that we did to Hezbollah. This is a bunch of hoodlums who knocked down a fence. It should never have happened. So we need to get these hostages home, and we need to end this war. And my anxiety has been is that when you get into a fight with someone who has less to lose than you do, you got to really, really evaluate the fight after 2 years. So I know it's easy to pontificate. I mean, I talked to, I'm chairing the Meade conference in 2 days. I've got, Dermer's coming, Gallant's coming, Gantz is coming. I have Ronan Barr, head of Shin Bet, at dinner at my house on Sunday with the whole national security team. I mean, I'm in the game, guys. I care about this stuff really badly. I am telling you, my anxiety here as it relates to this is, we are redefining, the success needs to be redefined. Maybe it's too late. They're going to empty Gaza City. I don't like the idea that the last two heads of the IDF have pleaded with the prime minister not to do this. It doesn't make me feel very good, guys, to be clear. Now, yes, the military pushes back on presidents as well as prime ministers. So that's a healthy democracy. So I believe fundamentally this war needs to end, and it needs to end yesterday. And I think my fear has been that Israel has never been safer inside its borders than today. And I applaud the prime minister for achieving that. I supported the Iran strikes at Fordo. I would rather have done it through the JCPOA, but I supported that. Obviously, Hezbollah, I supported that. The Houthis, I supported that. All fine. But as more secure they are inside the borders, they're probably weaker than they've ever been in the world. And as an American Jew, that really breaks my heart. Okay, guys, it really breaks my heart. And people will say, "Well, we've been there before." No, we've never been like this. I think there's a fundamental issue that we've got to address, and the war's got to end, and we're going to have a lot of work to do to repair it. So long-winded way.
No, that's fine. No, I have a quick follow-up on that, and I also want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions, so you can start preparing your questions already now. I'm just going to wind down with a few quick ones, and then we'll open up the floor. Just as a follow-up, practically, Ambassador Nides, if you were in Prime Minister Netanyahu's shoes, practically, what would you do right now? Based on your philosophy and what you just described, how would you execute on what you just espoused?
I would take a partial deal. I would get 10 hostages out. I would agree.
You wouldn't go for a total deal. You wouldn't say
no. I would of course, I want a total deal. I want everyone home. I want everybody home. I want the hostages. Whoever's left. Of course, I would do a total deal. Okay, I did a total deal at the beginning. I've said for 100%. I'd like to kill every single Hamas fighter. I'm all good with that, guys. I want this war to end. I want to get these hostages home. And I think, again, I go back to this idea of the definition of success. I've done thousands of negotiations. And when I'm negotiating with David about something and I realize that you have no interest in selling what you're selling, you have no interest in selling what I want to buy. So I'm like negotiating with you, and I'm negotiating with a guy who doesn't want to sell something. So I have to figure out, I got to change my strategy. So again, I started this by saying very simply, very clearly, who is to blame? We are now 2 years into this, okay? 2 years into this. And I can't, and I'm a Zionist. I will not support an arms embargo. I will not support the idea that these countries are saying there's support a Palestinian state. I want a real two-state solution. I want these countries to come together with the United States. So I'm not into this kind of game to like pressure Israel. This needs to stop. And the prime minister should take a partial deal, should get as many hostages back as he possibly can. And he needs to basically go to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and say, you know what? Enough. Okay, because again, I say this with the greatest respect. No, not the greatest respect for Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, because I don't have respect for those two, but I do with the prime minister. I would be honest to believe that if he had said, listen, you know what? If you want to leave my government, leave my government. You know, I think the Israeli government should have done a much better job on the humanitarian stuff than they did. They allowed the narrative. Bibi is smarter than this. I know this guy. I've spent hundreds of hours with this guy. He is brilliant at this, okay? But the idea that he allowed the narrative that Israel wasn't acting in a humane way, we're Jews. And even if you say, well, how can we feed people that who have basically keep our people and are killing our people and are kidnapping our people? Because we are Jews, we cannot be as bad as them, okay? And if you'll say, no, they had plenty of food. That's not true, but let's assume they had plenty of food. We lost the narrative. Bibi is really good at narratives. I would have flooded the zone with food, because guess what? If you flood the zone with food, the value of the food goes down. It's the way how markets work, right? That didn't happen effectively. So
and the hostages that would be left in Gaza after the partial deal?
Just to be clear, the hostage families want a partial deal.
No, I'm not arguing with
then you negotiate for the second. You can negotiate the second deal and try to get more hostages out. Try to figure out, and if you have to say, I'm not going any farther into Gaza, or I am pulling back from Gaza, I am pulling back to the borders, and say, you stand up and do a speech to the Israeli people, we have succeeded. Yes, there are going to be Hamas fighters walking around with little flags, and they're going to be causing trouble. Can I remind people, Hamas has been in Gaza for 20 plus years, okay? For 20 plus years, okay? So it's not like this is it was a new thing. I think Israel, if the mighty Israel could basically make sure October 7th never happened again, okay? And we got our hostages out, as best as we can, as many as we can. And then you'd say, well, then Bibi will look like a loser. He'll look like Israel folded. Okay. I don't think having destroyed Gaza, which by the way, Hamas started it, I don't think anyone's going to suggest that Bibi is, quote, weak after destroying, much of Iran's nuclear program and Hezbollah and the Houthis. He had a moment in time to say to the Israeli people, look what I have done. Look what I have done. I have made Israel a stronger democratic Jewish state. Okay. And I'm going to define success in Gaza in a way that people can understand. That's what I would do.
No, here.
And I, again, as someone who cares deeply, deeply, as all we do, but we got some serious issues, and we're gonna have a lot of work as a group, as a community. We're gonna have a lot of work to do.
Okay, I have final two questions I'm going to ask before we open the floor. So, first question is just on this Israel point. Then we'll talk something quickly about New York City. What would you say was the most surprising or most moving, one or the other, or both, experience you had in your 2+ year tenure as ambassador?
The most significant thing, I went to visit every Jewish and Arab family in Israel, Druze, Jews, who lost someone in a terrorist attack. So when I was the ambassador, I would go to the homes of Israelis there was we haven't had this happen in a while, but when I was there, this was happening a bit, nothing like an intifada, but there was a bombing and a stabbing in Tel Aviv. There was a car hijack in Haifa. And so I would go to the homes of those families, the bereaved families, and I would sit in many cases, there were Orthodox Jews, and I would first, I'd spend time with the men. Obviously wasn't spending time with the women. In most of the cases they were speaking in Hebrew. I'd have a translator to make sure I did, and I'd hold the hand of the father in the case where the mother would let me, and just say, I'm here on behalf of the president to just show my respect. Okay. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I'm not good at this. I'm not a clergy. I just wanted to be there to show empathy about what was going on. So it was loud, it was the hard for me. But when I looked into the faces of these families and saw wow, the United States American ambassador is in my home, holding my hand and expressing his condolences in a real way, that was to me the single most important thing that I could have done, and it was exceptionally meaningful.
What inside of you made you make that part of the role? Like
I don't know. It's probably the same part of that I would do my stupid Shabbat Shalom videos on Fridays and goofy, like at the 7-Eleven, and I care. It goes back to my childhood. It goes back to I'm a little Jewish kid from Duluth, Minnesota. I'm not that sophisticated. You can't fake authenticity. Either you're real or you're not real. Okay. You can't okay, I'm going to pretend I'm a condolence giver and I'm going to go house the, it's not who I am. I cared about it. And I didn't care if they were, the Haredis or liberals or Druze. It was irrelevant to me. I think, you either have it in your kishkas or you don't. Either you care about this or you don't. And I cared. And I'm sure if David was here, he would say he cared, and Jack would say he cared, and everyone expresses their caring in different ways, and that's how I express.
Okay, my final question for this evening is: I'm curious on your perspectives on a potential Mayor Mamdani here in New York City. I'm curious if you're concerned about him being mayor in terms of some of his rhetoric or things that he hasn't been able to deny or walk away from, or maybe you're comfortable with Mayor Mamdani. I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts
are. Am I sassy? Listen, when the mayor candidates don't say things about a global intifada, even those words coming out of one's mouth, and I don't know exactly the context, but he didn't do what I think I would have done, which is denounce or basically I made a mistake or misunderstood. Again, I don't like it. Obviously, I don't particularly like anything that implies something about perception that you're anti-Israeli or anti-Jewish. Now, I don't believe he's necessarily anti-Jewish. I think, do I believe that some of the rhetoric around Bibi and Israel, I like to remind people, okay, it's not a far path when you say, I really, really don't like Bibi Netanyahu. And then you say, well, and by the way, I don't really, really like Israel. Okay, guess what the next thing is, right? So do I get worried about it? Yeah, I get worried about it. So listen, barring some extraordinary change event, he's going to be the mayor. Barring some like something that happens, I've known Andrew Cuomo for a long time. I don't know Eric Adams. Barring something that's crazy, he's going to be mayor. So guess what, guys? We better understand that and try to make this guy successful, okay, in my view, okay? Because you can hand wring and say, oh my God, and take our toys and go home. No, or we can basically get Jews and Christians and educate this guy and make sure he's a successful mayor. I think it's unclear. Obviously, he's a young guy. I mean, if you put the Israel stuff aside for a second, you could have some anxiety of being 34 years old or 35 years old and never run anything, and you're going to run, the biggest city in the country. I'm a business guy too, but so I think he will end up being mayor. We got to make him successful, but obviously, I'm a believer in, words matter, and when you make mistakes, you need to own up to them, and that's going to be his challenge.
Okay, excellent. So we have a few minutes remaining, so I'd love to open up the floor to our audience.
Just be nice to me, everybody.
Just for the recording's purpose, I'm going to repeat the question if it's okay, just for our podcast. So I think the question is, again, nobody's a prophet here, but the way you see the trajectory heading, what's your best estimate of where the conflict is 5 years from now? Would that be a fair way to say something like that? Or not conflict? I don't know.
Again, so I think that, listen, first of all, I think the next prime minister is going to end up having to be in charge of rebuilding Gaza. Okay. I don't think the Israeli people will allow Israel to occupy Gaza in a long-term way, because I don't think, first of all, they're not going to want to afford it. I think they understand there's a reason why we disengaged in the last time, contrary to some of the religious right who would like to end up doing that. I think the chances of turning into Riviera on the Gaza, in Gaza is probably on the Mediterranean is probably a little bit far-fetched. I think what's going to end up happening here is we are going to get at some point relatively soon, I believe, and the only person who can really do this is Donald Trump, to be clear. He's the only one who has the influence to Bibi Netanyahu to basically end this war. But I think ultimately we're going to get to a point that we'll get some hostages back, okay, and some sort of deal. I do believe that at the end of the day, that the Arab countries are going to have to step up to help rebuild and then ultimately manage Gaza. I also believe fundamentally that the only way you're going to have this as long term, the Palestinian Authority, a different Palestinian Authority, not a Palestinian Authority run by a boss, but a different Palestinian Authority is going to have the governance inside Gaza, okay, with Arab military support and boundaries set by the Israelis. So this is really, I've got a lot of my friends have been involved in all these plannings, and you read all these stories. I'm an incrementalist. I mean, I'm a step-by-step guy, okay? The step of the guy is we got to end the war. We got to get as many of these hostages who are alive to get them home, okay? And then we got to basically convince the Arab countries to actually come in. One of the things that I worry about is the Arab countries, a lot of my friends who are prime ministers and leaders of these countries, they talk really well, but them actually getting in and writing the checks and actually getting engaged is going to be very difficult to do. And ultimately, that's my biggest fear. That's why ultimately I wanted the Palestinian Authority to be there, because they could fund those guys. Remember, the Palestinian Authority has a military operation in the West Bank, and they could actually be relatively secure given the resources, and they're trained to do this. Way easier than bringing in the Egyptian military, the Emirati military, dividing up Gaza. But we've yet to see it play out, but I think step by step.
Can you address this for 1 second? As you're talking, Qatar, its role in the region, its complex,
listen,
dynamic.
How do you
see the Qataris?
I mean, listen, we're all in the in this web. Okay, I mean, the United States, the Qataris host our largest military bases in Qatar, which they pay for. Okay, we like that. They have. I mean, the Qataris are really smart. I mean, they basically have, Article 5, and they're not even a part of NATO because we have all of our resources are in there. We're not going to sit and wait to see something happen to Qatar. So that's one. Two, the Israelis, over a long period of time, which has been documented over and over again, were very much involved with the Qataris as money was going from Qatar to Egypt into Gaza. Okay, so the Qataris have played a role across the board with I'm not saying nefarious, but it's reality, right? And so that is when we at some point when the war is over, we do need to analyze how we got here. Okay, we do need to step back and understand they haven't even had a hearing on how October 7th has happened. Think about that. It's been 2 years. Again, I'm not trying to be political. It's been 2 years, and they have not in the Knesset had a hearing about what happened and how this happened. They'll say, well, we're still active in the war and we're doing this and it's distracting. Okay, I expect that. We had 9/11, guys. And by the way, we were doing a war in Afghanistan and Iraq at the same time that we had the 9/11 Commission to find out what happened and how it happened. So we need to analyze that. The Qatari process is going to be part of that. They got to analyze how it happened on October 7th, what went wrong, make sure it never happens again. So that should be part of any, in my humble view, should be part of any discussion.
4 questions, so I was going to repeat if I can remember them. But the first question was if there was a President Kamala Harris in office right now, would she have executed the B-2 bombing on Iran, we'll call move to the left or the anti-Semitic bent of substantial parts of the Democratic Party? How do you feel about that? What were the other 2 questions quickly?
Bibi responsible.
Oh, do you hold Bibi responsible for October 7th? And the third question was?
Biden anti-Semitic. Oh, the Democratic Party. I got it. I know what to
So
say.
you have the
okay, let me.
Oh, the world opinion, and is that redeemable?
So let me. I'm not going to answer all the questions, but yeah, I got the theme. So let me just say, okay. So when I was ambassador, Biden showed up to Israel on his 10th visit. Okay, on his 10th visit, and I remember standing on the tarmac in Ben Gurion Airport at 3:00 in the afternoon, sweating like a pig. Okay, because I had just I had Bennett had just stepped down. I had Bennett as prime minister, and he had just stepped down and gave the reins to Lapid. So I had Bennett and Lapid and Bougie, and then Bibi was kind of hanging around the hoop as the opposition leader. So he was hanging around the tarmac too. And Biden gets off the plane. I'm worried that he's going to trip or something's going to happen. It's really hot, and he gets up on the stage. That was an editorial. Gets up on the stage and he looks at the camera, and he says, "You do not need to be a Jew to be a Zionist," okay? And he actually believed it in a way that no other president, I think, has ever really believed it. Because here's why. Joe Biden is an old-time politician. He's an old-time politician. He grew up with Golden Meir. I mean, he loved Israel. I mean, by the way, to his detriment, okay? The people in the White House, plenty of people in the White House try to push him more aggressively to the left to go after Bibi, and he wouldn't do it. I mean, it was really driven by Biden himself. And when October 7th happened, October 14th, he gets on an airplane and flies to Israel and embraces Bibi Netanyahu on the tarmac of Ben Gurion Airport to show respect and dignity. And by the way, it was Biden who sent the first ships in the Mediterranean when the Iranians attacked Israel for the first time. So all the bullshit you hear about, Joe Biden not liking Israel, it's a bunch of nonsense, okay? And it infuriates me, not to you suggest that, but infuriates me when people say that, oh my God, Biden wasn't, he didn't give the bombs for, to the last bunch of bombs to drop on Rafah. I'm like, what? I mean, it was this administration that gave him all the tools they needed in response to October 7th. Okay. So that's a little bit of an editorial. You asked me about the Vice President Harris. Harris would have followed exactly Biden's issue and how he kind of saw things. I don't know if she would have done to be honest with you, if she would have authorized the military operations on Fordo. I don't know. I mean, I didn't think Trump was going to do it. Remember, Trump didn't do it his first term. To be clear, I used to sit with Bibi Netanyahu day in and day out and used to say the following thing: we have the will, but not the means, and you have the means, but not the will. Basically saying you guys, Americans, are a bunch of wimps. Okay. And Trump too, Trump won. He didn't do this, and Biden didn't do this, and Obama did. And I give Trump credit. Okay. I would have preferred to do this by a deal because, quite frankly, I don't think the nuclear program has been obliterated, contrary to what the President Trump has said. In fact, his own intelligence operations didn't use those words. Would I rather had a deal that I could actually monitor and be there? We have no monitoring capabilities. We have no idea what they've rebuilt or will rebuild. So do I think Harris would have done it? I have no idea. I mean, I think we made it clear if they were close to breakout. Now, I think they probably would have had a military operation once those, 400 ballistic missiles were shot into Israel from the Iranians. And by the way, the story hasn't really been told how much damage those missiles actually did to Tel Aviv, some of those communities. Many of us have been there. It was way more serious than people. My Israeli friends, for the first time, were scared. Okay? We're scared. And I said 100 times, we should go after Fordo. If the Iranians had a nuclear weapon or the capabilities to shoot a nuclear weapon in that they had done with these ballistic missiles, we would have been screwed. So I'm totally in that piece of this. We have you asked the Democratic Party, this idea that the Democratic Party has become like a party of the left and that somehow they're anti-Islam is ridiculous. Okay. I've spoken to 100 Democratic organizations. Do I think there's anger among Democrats? And by the way, the MAGA side, don't kid yourself. It's not just this. As Jews, we should be very focused on this. It's not just the AOCs of the world who are like yakking about this. The MAGA right is infuriated about some of this stuff. We have a serious issue in the United States about support of Israel. If tomorrow the MOU, remember we're on like the 8th year of the MOU. The MOU is the agreement to give the $3.5 billion a year to Israel. They just take the cash and they buy our weapon systems. I tried to get that extended when they were at the 6th year. I thought it would be a good thing for Biden to do, and we just couldn't get it done. Do I think right now that we could pass a new 10-year MOU without conditions on Israel? I don't know. I don't know because I don't think we'd have all the Republican votes either. So we have a huge amount of work to do here, guys, and we should recognize that. We have a whole generation of kids who are 25 to 35 that we may have lost for a period of time. Okay. And by the way, it's not just the non-Jews, okay? I bet you put true serum on some of the people in this room that your kids are giving you grief at home about some of the positions of Israel. There's no way that none of you have those kids at your house because I have them in my house, okay? Okay. And if we, this group of people here who actually showed up to listen to me, have family members or cousins who say Israel isn't doing what they should be doing, you can imagine how tough it is out there. So we have a lot of work to do, not just with Democrats, certainly have to work with Democrats. We have to work with Republicans and the world at large. This isn't good when you have the Germans and the French and the British and the Canadians all coming after you at once. And Bibi will say, well, we've been through this before. No, we haven't. Not like this. Not like this. And I think we have to recognize we got some issues. We'll get through it. Israel, I'm going to Israel on Tuesday. It is a spectacular place. It is a place where is a democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, our best ally. It's a place that business is flourishing. I'm at Blackstone. We bought a huge company called Priority Softwares. We love the place. I'm on the board of AI21. It's the industrial capital of the world. Okay, this little teeny country. Okay, and it's beautiful and it's robust and it's stronger. But we have work to do on the world stage to keep that support going.
Okay. Any final? Yeah, go ahead, David. Final question.
The question is why should America support Israel, and why is it so important to America? I just say very simply, Go to Israel. Check it out. See what I see. See what I saw. This is not, remember, there's 10 million people live in Israel now, or 9.7 million people, 7 million or 6.5 million are Jews. There are Druze, there are Arabs, there are Palestinians. It is a melting pot. It is a democracy. Think about this for a minute. This is a little teeny country that's only 77 years old. Okay, this little teeny country, 77 years old. It was created because the Jews had nowhere else to go. Okay, and out of nothing, God or whatever you think of created this thing called the State of Israel. Okay, and by the way, it's a country that on last Saturday, 400,000 people hit the streets to basically say to Bibi Netanyahu, do something different, okay? 400,000 people would be which would be approximately, let's call it, 7% of the country, okay? That would be the equivalent of, 30 million Americans coming out, okay? No one got killed. No one got arrested. This is Israel. This is this democracy, this beautiful melting pot of a place. It's messy. It's messy. You got people on the right. You got people on the left. But what other country in the Middle East can do what Israel can do? I mean, what other country in the Middle East people can stand up on the street corner and denounce the prime minister or support the prime minister? What other country in the world has people who wake up every day that want to make sure it's striving and thriving? That's Israel. So I'm a Zionist to my core. Okay, I care deeply about the continuation, obviously, the existence of the State of Israel. But that doesn't mean you can't be critical, and that means you can't make it better, and that doesn't mean it's not important and you can criticize it. That's okay. Israel can handle it. It can handle it. They're Jews, okay? We can handle it, but we got to work on it, and I think that's really, really important.
I think that's a great note to end on. I want to thank Ambassador Nides for his time, for his insight, for his service. Thank you so much.